Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Welcome back, everyone, to another lecture in Tasawwuf. We left off in the middle of talking about the Shaykh and how kind of the people gather around the Shaykh. And, we said that the Shaykh is somebody who's gone off and has been able to come back and then be able to instruct us. And we also talked about how sometimes people can go off and not come back. Spiritually, that is, meaning that they're not capable of teaching even though they're of a high spiritual rank. And we talked a little bit about that. He's going to pick up on the motif of the Shaykh, and he's going to spend a lot of time. He uses a lot of analogy and beautiful rhetoric flair in the poem, but the upshot is the example that he uses, which is a very, very common example in Tasawwuf, is that the Shaykh is like a physician. So he has a lot of medical examples. He talks a little bit about pharmacology, herbology. He talks about Galen, some of the ancient the ancient physicians, and how the Shaykh is doing that, but for the heart, meaning the spiritual heart. And that really is the best example, because that's exactly what the Shaykh's job is. The Shaykh is there to help administer healing for the spiritual ailments that befall us. And this is one such mechanism, right? This writing that we have itself is hopefully giving us the spiritual medicine that we need for our ailments. Okay, and then after that, he also mentions something which is important, which is that we're not by ourselves, we're going to be in a group. And this, even though he doesn't formally talk about the tariqah and like the tariqah setup, that's basically what he's getting at, is that when people gather around the Shaykh, that becomes an order, that becomes a tariqah, a path, a spiritual path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there are going to be some dynamics that are involved with people, and sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not so good. So he's going to get into a little bit of that, and then segue into some of the things that you're like, how you dress and how you eat and things like that. That's maybe down the line a couple classes from now, but we might be able to get to some of those lines in the poem now. So we're still, talking about the rules. We're still in the section that talks about the rules, and continuing sort of with that motif of I said as medicine. And those examples are those metaphoric examples are important, not only to understand this text, but to understand all of the literature of Tasawwuf, because they're shared. Okay, we'll begin this discussion in the next clip, inshallah. Okay, so we're picking up on line 113. So he says, قال المصنف رحمه الله ونفعنا بعلومه في الدارين آمين وأحدق من حوله يمشون وكلهم إليه يوزعون. They circled about him walking, and they all assembled with him. Remember, we said that one of the signs of a Shaykh of Tasawwuf, other than they've traveled the path and their license and all of that, but the real sign that he's talking about, which is something that people just kind of forget about, is that people gather around that person because that person has been established as somebody who can help. And there are many knowledgeable mashayikh, but they just don't have any students. And that's also one of the things of history. When we talked about, you'll remember, hopefully, inshallah, the introductory to the Shafi'i madhab class, we talked about in that very early period, the sort of first 2 centuries of Islam, there are a lot of madhab that just didn't make the cut. Why? Well, natural disasters, like in the case of Imam al-Awza'i, radiallahu anhu, the books were like lost in the earthquakes in Sham, or there weren't enough students, like Layth ibn Sa'd, radiallahu anhu. Even though Imam al-Shafi'i said Imam al-Layth afqah min Malik, and that's a huge statement, because there was nobody more knowledgeable than Imam Malik radiallahu anhu. So, but there weren't any students. So that sometimes happens, right? So when people collect around a spiritual guide, in addition to the spiritual guide being legitimate, because the act of collecting around a person in and of itself is not a sign. You have to have license to do this. Then they gather around such a person, then that person is able to take on the murids. I also should mention, this is a little bit of a tangent, but kind of al-kalam yujurru al-kalam, as we say. The one phrase kind of drags another phrase, is that the more students there are, the more murids there are, you have to understand that just by definition, the type of quality of instruction will also change. If I'm lecturing you in a university, in a BA program, and I have we have this curriculum in this format, I can be very specific, I can be very nuanced, I can be very textual, and there can be a back and forth. But that's very different than if I had to go give a lecture in front of 1,000 or 10,000 people. that dynamic is just going to be different. Even if all those 10,000 people were at a university, and one would assume that they had advanced knowledge of what, or could have advanced knowledge of any subject, it's going to be different. So also, just something for me to highlight in my experience, the mashayikh that have like bazillions, I just exaggerate, but thousands of followers, murids, there's a different taste and flavor to that than the sheikh who has a couple of murids. Just something to think about. And I'm sure that will come back. Okay, 114. فرتب القوم على مراتب ما بين ماش راجل وراكب. He classified the people in degrees. Amongst them are those who walk on foot and those that ride. Okay, so not everybody in the group is of the same level, and this is where a lot of the nafs can come in, unfortunately. And I laugh because there's tariqah dynamics because we're humans. But the way we talk about it in an academic setting is we talk about dawa'ir al-intisab, the concentric circles of affiliation to the tariq. There are people that are just on the periphery, people that I love what this man has to say. His voice is very calming, he's very wise, mashallah. I love to attend the public lessons of this sheikh. Okay, you're just on the outside. That's great. That's great for you, and you know what you want, and you're benefiting, alhamdulillah. And then there are those that are closer that take the dhikr from the sheikh and ask the sheikhs for, guidance and tread the path. And then there are those that are even closer that have tread the path, and maybe the sheikh tasks them with helping other people that are. And so there are concentric circles of intisab, and this is kind of what he's talking about, that there are different levels of people. Levels, not that there are ranks, levels of proficiency of it. Like if you studied Sharia for 5, 7, 10 years, it's different than if you're just taking a class for the first time, right? I mean, obviously, it's different. And then he says in line 115, وحيث كلت نجب الأبدان قال أحدها يا حادي الأضعان. When the camels of the bodies tired, one of them said, O camel singer. And then 116, just to finish the thought, فَمِنْ هُنَا يُلَقَبُ الْقَوَّالَ حَادٍ لِأَجْلِ حَدْوِهِ الرِّجَالَ. This is how he is named the camel singer, because he sings to the men to make them go faster. So, I'm not a camel herder. I've been on a camel a couple times, just like the next Arab. But I think that there is a thing about people singing to their camels and talking to their horses. It's not my skill set, obviously, but I think that's where the motif comes from, the metaphor comes from, is that when the camel is kind of like, slacking off, because camels, mashallah, they can store water for a long periods of time, and they can travel long distances, and maybe there's like a little tune that the camel rider has to kind of get the camels to motivate them to go faster, or the camel is lost and then the camel herder or the owner sings the tune and then they find him. That's there. Anyway, muhim. What matters is that the sheikh is like that, the camel singer, because the sheikh has the ability to just look at you even sometimes and just cause you to be excited, can say something to you that doesn't seem any consequential, but can have an impact. I remember a story that my sheikh told me about his sheikh, Sheikh Muhammad Zaki ad-Din Ibrahim radiallahu anhu, is a very famous Sufi figure in Egypt, 60s, 70s, he died in the early 1990s, radiallahu anhu. He was a Shadhili sheikh, but he was an Azhari, he was a very well-known, he had the alamay and everything, so he was a very well-known Azhari sheikh, and his books are very well argued and, had a very, very, very strong grasp on hadith. And muhim, the sheikh wanted to send Sheikh al-Azhar like a note to do something. Something that has to do with the Zawiya or some kind of like Sufi situation in Egypt. So he sent like a little like note with my sheikh to go to Sheikh al-Azhar. And my sheikh is telling me, well, when I saw this note, I'm like, this is so simple. I mean, how do I go to Sheikh al-Azhar with this? Sheikh al-Azhar, the head of the whole thing, with this like little note. So he did. He walked in the door, he took an appointment, and he went, and then he gave Sheikh al-Azhar the note. And my sheikh is telling me, I'm convinced that nothing is going to happen. And then Sheikh al-Azhar read the note, and then he went like this with his turban. He's like, Hadir, like out of respect for Sheikh Muhammad Zaki ad-Din Ibrahim. So there are some people that are like that. They just have that, there's something about them. There's a secret. We call it a sir. There's a secret that Allah places in their heart that when they talk and they communicate, it's like an arrow just pierces you and you get it. Now, some of that is tawfiq and some of that is whether people are compatible. I've met many pious, super pious people and saintly people, but their words didn't penetrate me like they penetrated other people, and maybe my sheikh's words won't penetrate you the way that they penetrate me. So that's also part of it. There's a little bit of a relationship that you have to develop. Anyway, Sheikh is the camel singer, right? He's going to motivate you when you're about to just kind of collapse. 117 والسفر المذكور بالقلوب والشيخ في منزلة الطبيب. And the travel mentioned here is by the hearts, and the sheikh has the position of a doctor. Okay, so now he's going to pivot to the medicine example that I mentioned in the introductory clip. And again, the journey is the journey of the heart. So unlike the camel that's actually going to go on a journey, here the journey is just a journey of the heart. It's a journey inward. So sometimes that can be fatiguing. You can get really tired from all that mujahada, right? Sometimes you just want to just like let your guard down and just kind of give in and throw in the towel. And that's what the sheikh does. The sheikh, you see the sheikh as an example of consistency, an example of fortitude, an example of istiqama, being firm, and that's a tawfiq itself that comes from Allah Jalla wa Ala. We ask Allah Ta'ala to give us all of that, all of us to give all of us istiqama. So sometimes, as I said just a little while ago, just seeing the sheikh sometimes is enough to motivate you. So it's not like he actually has to do something or say something, but it's his state, his hal, his condition, his spiritual state that you see. It kind of makes you, I can do a little bit more. I can push myself a little bit more. I can go. And the going and pushing is something on the inside. I can do better than that. I can work on myself better. I can be more consistent. I long to have that spiritual state. I want to have that spiritual state. And an example, so the sheikh is like also an example. I know I said in the last class it's like a coach, but in this regard, not necessarily a coach, but somebody that you look up to, somebody that you want to emulate, and that you want to be like, because you see in that person the state, the quality of the heart that you yourself see. And we're running out of time, so we'll pick up the discussion of this in the next clip, inshallah. Okay, verse 118. So he says, rahimahullah, يعلم منها الغث والسمين ويدرك الصلب بها واللين. Of it he knows the emaciated and the healthy, and he grasps what is dry and hard along with what is soft. Okay, so the sheikh is the doctor. Okay, so he knows. Part of being the sheikh is the sheikh's got to know, like, look, I know. This guy has too much of this. This person has too little of that. This person needs tough love. This person needs soft touch, etc. And then it's when it's gendered. There are issues with men and there are issues with women. And sometimes, what you're going to say here is not what you're going to say here, and how you conduct yourself here is not how you conduct here. A lot of tariqas, a lot of traditional tariqas are men-only tariqas. I've also seen that, and I think historically that was the case. In the modern world, that's less and less the case. In the modern world, not only are the tariqas mixed-gendered, but in many respects, the women tend, not always, but in many cases, let's say, they are better murids than the men. Whether it's something about women having a default ability to sacrifice and the motherly instinct, so therefore they know how to sacrifice the nafs and things like that, Allahu alam. But something that I've also observed amongst my students as well. But then, a man dealing with a woman or a woman dealing with a man, there's a dynamic there that you have to follow the Sharia norms. So again, all of that's going to be different, but because the sheikh is the doctor, the sheikh is looking at it from the point of view of how do I fix the problem, because I have an obligation to help the person. Just like a physician takes, the Hippocratic oath and, to do no harm and all that stuff, which is an ancient tradition. Well, same thing with tasawwuf. Your role, or the sheikh's role, is to guide, not to judge, but to guide, the way that the Prophet ﷺ guided, and it was gentle with the companions. Okay, verse 119. وَيَعْلَمَ الْبَسِيطَ وَالْمُرَكَّبَ وَمَا بَدَى مِنْهَا عَلَيْهِ وَاخْتَبَى. The sheikh knows the simple and the complex, the basit and the murakkab, the simple and the complex, what is apparent of it and what is hidden. Some problems seem simple. But when you understand the problem, you realize that it's a murakkab, it's a complex problem. Like if somebody comes and says, like a simple example, like, you know, has like some kind of anthropomorphic interpretation of the verse of like al-istiwa, wa al-rahmanu al-arsh istawa, or the hand of Allah, or they have some kind of anthropomorphic interpretation. Well, simply we know that that is wrong because, hasha lillah, Allah Ta'ala can't have any human form. Laysa kamithlihi shay. But it's really a complex problem because it's complex in one, their misunderstanding of the language of the revelation, the Arabic in that language cannot apply to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala aslan. You can't refer to al-ilah with those words. And not understand not understanding literal and figurative language. And having neither studied balagha or neither studied usul al-fiqh. So you know that because this is something that we deal with in the academy, right? We know that there are people that have these false notions. We know that it might seem simple. That's not what the verse means. But in the haqiqah, it's a complex issue. And then the opposite happens. Sometimes somebody comes to you, I have this complex issue, and they're like, panting, and they're going on, and then it turns out to be really, really simple. Instead of doing this, do this, and all your problems are solved. So one of the things that the sheikh has to be able to do is see the simple for the complex, and know that oftentimes it's not what's presented, that there's also something that's hidden, which is another aspect. Sometimes people say something, but they're really camouflaging something else, which is another issue altogether. And then in verse 120 he says, وَالطَّبْعَ وَالْمِزَاجَ وَالتَّرْكِيبَ وَالْكَوْنَ وَالتَّحْلِيلَ وَالتَّرْتِيبَ. And the sheikh needs to know the characteristics and the balance and the compounds and the being and the melting and the softening. So people are ma'adin, or people, the Prophet ﷺ said people are metals, and therefore the sheikh needs to know that everyone has a different temperament, and everyone has a different pressure point, and everyone has a different set of baggage and background and trauma and hurt and pain. And therefore the sheikh has to be able to give that person what that person needs, not some like generic blanket kind of piece of advice. Work harder, be happy, don't be sad. Okay, sometimes that's not going to help because people need something new. And so the sheikh, like the doctor, needs to be able to know the solution. Alhamdulillah, the solutions are also like medicine, universal solutions. It's not like rocket science, but the sheikh has to be able to also know when to push and when not to push. So in my own journey, alhamdulillah, mostly have the soft touch, but I've had the hard love, the tough love before, and those lessons, they kind of get you in the gut. When the sheikh is tough with you, you're like, oh man, I must have messed up. Astaghfirullah al-azim, and you remember them, right? So the sheikh knows when to push and when to, as we say, when to be gentle. Verse 121. قد أحكم التشريح والمفاصل وصار علم الطب فيه حاصل. Okay, he's just continuing very deeply in the medical motif here. He masters dissection and knows the limbs until the knowledge of medicine is in him. Knows that the medicine of knowledge is in him. In the study of usul al-fiqh, we call this faqihun nafs, the jurist of the self. That the science of usul al-fiqh and ijtihad and the tools of interpretation are so ingrained in the person, they are a part of that person. If you wrung that person out, they would be usul al-fiqh. So this is that level. In usul al-fiqh, it's called hadithun nafs. In the science of hadith, I believe it's called muhaddith al-badan, or hadith faqih al-badan. I think it's called faqih al-badan. So they have different terms for the same concept, that the person has mastered the subject to the point that they are that subject. So that's what the sheikh is. He knows how to dissect the problem. He's heard it before. He understands the patterns. Even before you even begin to speak, he's like, look, I know what you're talking about. This is the way you kind of need to go. Many times when you go to a doctor, a seasoned doctor, an experienced doctor, they'll do the same thing. They'll take one look at you and they'll know what's wrong. And you want to go on and on and on. They're like, look, I understand you have this problem. I got all of these things are secondary or tertiary. The problem is this. Take this medicine, 5-6 days, come back, you'll be fine. The sheikh needs to have the same type of experience with the students or the murids. And then verse 122. وكان عشابا وصيدلاني وكان وكان عشابا وصيدلاني قدحا وكحالا ومارستاني. So the sheikh has to be an herbalist, a pharmacist, an ophthalmologist, and a master of kuhl, so the thing rhymes, and an expert physician. So there are different medicines, there are different specialities, there are different tools, and the sheikh's got to know all that stuff. Because not all of the problems are spiritual problems. Actually, when you get into it, and when there's a deep kind of experience with tasawwuf, you kind of see that most people, their problems are just like dunyawi problems. It's not necessarily spiritual. So the sheikh, the sheikh needs to know how to solve those problems as well, and the dynamic of the dunya bleeding into the spiritual life, and the opposite. Sometimes people have mental illness. That's a very common thing today with tasawwuf. As a matter of fact, it's not just common now, because a lot of the old physicians used to say that people that are manic depressive, they tend to be the ones that are the flock to tasawwuf, because they see it tasawwuf some kind of like solution. So the sheikh needs to know those things as well. It's not all just like take this dhikr and do this, or read this portion of the Quran, or this set of verses X number of times, everything's going to be fine. Sometimes there are other problems that need other solutions. And one of the things that we know from our study of Islam is that we use different tools and sciences and different knowledges to solve different problems. So rational problems need rational solutions. Sharia problems need Sharia solutions. Problems of tasawwuf need tasawwuf solutions. Theological problems need theological solutions, etc. So when the murid comes to the sheikh and people are flocking around the sheikh, it's not just, we're going to study Sharia together and just pray Qiyamul Layl. Sometimes people start to, or oftentimes, all the time, let's just say all the time, people start sharing their inner problems that they got. Okay, and then verse 123, أمهر في الأعراض والأخلاط في أسقل جالينوس أو بقراتي. He has reached expertise in symptoms and the opposite sicknesses of the stomach more than Galen and Hippocrates. To rhyme, but he was a great Galen and Hippocrates were ancient physicians that began this tradition of medicine that Islam picked up. And the sheikh has to be an expert even at that level. Let me pick up the discussion in the next clip, because I won't have enough time now. So let me just begin by repeating verse 123. أمهر في الأعراض والأخلاط من أسقل جالينوس أو بقراتي. He has reached expertise in symptoms and the opposite sicknesses of the stomach more than Galen or Hippocrates. So one of the things the sheikh needs to do is be able to tell you what's wrong with you. So he has to be able to read the symptoms. And just prima facie, is it a spiritual problem or not? A lot of times people come and they think it's a spiritual problem, but it's actually not. They have bad sleeping habits, or poor health, or there's a mental thing, there's a mental illness. That happens. People are manic. So, a lot of people have ADHD, for example, and the attention thing and the hyperactivity becomes an issue. Okay, that's fine, there's nothing wrong with that, but that's not a spiritual problem. It might manifest in your spiritual world, so you might think it's a spiritual problem. But when you go to the sheikh, and the sheikh is, okay, but this is not really the issues of tasawwuf, this is an issue of something else. You need to follow this line of these steps, these solutions to be able to solve the problem. And then we can come back, and then once your stasis is in the middle, then we can work on the other stuff. So that's one of the things that the sheikh needs to be able to do. So it's a tall order. It's really like a version of ijtihad. And again, I think I mentioned this about why in the end of Jam' al-Jawama, As-Subki, Taj al-Subki, like he concludes the whole usul book, one of the greatest usul books of all time, with a section on tasawwuf, because it's really the same skill set that you need for usul al-fiqh, you need it for tasawwuf. Okay, line 124. فعندما صح له تحصيل يممه السقيم والعليل. And when what he has is real, the critically ill and the sick see him. 125. فكان يبريهم من الأمراض وساخط القلب يعود راد. or radi, afwan, he cures them of sickness, and the one whose heart is enraged, afwan, becomes pleased. So obviously there's a good result. So the people that are sick, they go to the sheikh, they follow the sheikh's advice, and they come out feeling good. In this regard, one of the problems of tasawwuf is also people not following what the sheikh says. And that's a big, big problem, especially in the modern world because of social media and people have access. They think they have access to everything and information and this and that. So you're kind of like, I'm going to do it my way. So I'm going to ask this sheikh and I'm going to ask that sheikh. And that's why the medical example is very important, because that's not how medicine works. You can get a second opinion, okay, but there's only going to be a range. If you have a specific problem, if you have a stomach problem, it's only going to be a series of things it can be. It's not going to be like you have a problem with your ear, or maybe that's a bad example because I don't know if that's actually possible. But you know what I'm saying is that if you have a stomach problem, there's going to be a range in the medical community and what the literature says that it possibly could be. Maybe somebody will say it's this or that, but they're not going to say, oh, it's something else. You have your career is what's causing this problem or something like that. So you can take opinions and you can search until you find the sheikh that you feel you can benefit from. But when you find that person, you got to benefit from the person. So you got to follow what the sheikh says. So just because he's writing like this, it doesn't mean like it's a magic pill where you're going to walk in, the sheikh is going to touch you, and then everything's going to go away. You have to take the advice and work hard. And that's where my example of the sheikh being a coach, I think, is very useful, because the sheikh is going to tell you how to play, the moves that you need to make, show you how to train, observe you train, but you got to do the work. The sheikh is not going to do the work for you. That's not the role of the sheikh. Okay, 126. وَلَيْسَ هَذَا طِبُّ الْجَالِيُنُوسِ وَإِنَّمَا يَخْتَصُّ بِالنُّفُوسِ. This is not the medicine of Galen. It is concerned with the self and nafs. And that's what I said in the beginning, that if you were to define the science of tasawwuf, it is the set of teachings that helps take the nafs from one level to the next level. That's what tazkiyah is about. It's about the nafs. And that's why there's only so much that these examples go, because it's not about a physical thing, it's about the nafs, which is something that is part of our makeup as a human being and can be of different kinds and also different flavors, because we also have different personalities. 127. فهكذا شيوخ قدما كانوا يا حسرتي إذا سلفوا وبانوا. This is how the sheikhs were. Alas, they have gone past and disappeared. And as I said before, this is a common motif in tasawwuf that the real thing doesn't exist anymore. I mean, I don't agree with that in that way, because obviously we're talking about it, so it exists in this sense that we're teaching about it, okay? But it was always something rare, and the pretenders are always more than the real thing. I mean, that's just the case with anything, right? Anything that has a high reward and a high return, there's always going to be pretenders. So there are pretenders in fiqh, there are pretenders in hadith, there are pretenders da'is, there are pretenders, institutions of Islamic learning. It's all over. This is par for the course. This is no different. And there are people that in the most grotesque manifestation of tasawwuf, they make money off of the murids, they live off the murids, they ruin their lives and all that spiritual abuse and stuff like that. Yeah, that stuff exists, but that's not what we're talking. That's not tasawwuf. That's something that's human nature. What we're talking about here was the real thing. And alhamdulillah, those people do exist. But even in the past, they were few. I mean, it's not like there's a Sufi sheikh on every corner. Just like there's not a mufti on every corner. It's just a skill set that you got to learn. And Allah gives you the tawfiq to be good at it, and then you can be good at it. Okay, the next section is the group aspect. So let's see how far we get in that. Verse 128. Of course, in the original poem, I don't believe there are sections. I think it's just one draw-down list. But in all commentaries, there will be sections. I could be wrong. I haven't seen a manuscript of the original poem. Okay, verse 128. فَكَانَ إِذْ ذَاكَ اجْتِمَاعُ الْقَوْمِ لَهُ لِعِلْمِ عَمَلٍ عَنْ عِلْمِ. The gathering of the people around him, meaning the sheikh, is to learn to act from knowledge. Okay, so the sheikh's got to give you the data. He's got to teach you about tasawwuf and teach you your basic Islam. Why? Because there can be no tasawwuf without the Islam and the Iman in the hadith of Gabriel alayhi salam. There's no such thing as there's just tasawwuf. La, you have to have sharia, you have to have correct actions, your orthopraxis, you have to have correct belief, orthodoxy, and then you have to do the hard work of the self-purification. Why? The Prophet ﷺ said all of that is the deen. هذا جبريل جاء يعلمكم دينكم. This is Gabriel, he came to teach you your religion. So the religion equals those components. Now you don't have to be a mujtahid, you don't have to be a hafiz of the hadith, you don't have to be like Sibawayh in language, but you have to have a basic understanding of the Sharia so you can live your life according to the Sharia, because it's only from the Sharia that you'll be able to journey. And that's the job also of the Shaykh, is that they're going to be instruction. And this is a criticism that people have of Tasawwuf over the years, is that a lot of the Sufis are just uneducated. It's a legitimate criticism, and that's why we're teaching. So we ask Allah to enlighten us. Verse 129. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ ذَلِكَ عَنْ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ ذَلِكَ عَنْ رَوِيَّةٍ بَلْ يَحْضُرُ الْقَوْمُ عَلَى السَّوِيَّةِ. This is not done by agreement. He is present with the people according to their level. And, teach people where they are and how they are. 130. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ أَيْضًا لَدَى الْعِشَاءِ إِذْ فِيهِ نَهْيٌ وَهُوَ الْإِخْفَاءِ. He is not after the time of the Isha. It is not after the time of Isha prayer, because this is advised against and it is time for rest. So this is like an example that you have to make yourself available for the students and meet the students. So for people that work and have a active, professional life, you're not going to meet them at 11:30 in the morning on Tuesday and Wednesday, because everyone's at work or at school if they're full-time students. So you got to do it early in the day, use a medium like this, or at night, or on the weekend, right? So in America, where I live most of the time, we have our functions are Friday night and then sometimes on Saturday and Sundays. But we can't do like the traditional Thursday night majlis of dhikr, because Thursday is a work day and the next day is a work day as well. So it's just got to be, it's just simple, we got to be accessible. And then 131, maybe we'll stop with that. وَافْتَقَرُوا فِيهِ لِلْإِلْتِلَافِ لِيَعْلَمَ الْمُسْتَوْفِي حَالَ الْوَافِي. In it they depend upon assembly, so that the one who is imperfect gets to know the state of the perfect one. So one of the benefits of being in a group, and I'm going to pick up on this in the next class because I'm seeing that I'm running out of time, is that you get to see how you're doing and you get to see the good example, the senior murids versus the non-senior murids, etc. We'll pick up on that in the next clip, but we'll put a pause in it here. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam wa sallallahu ala sayyidina maulana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Okay, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. In today's class, we finished the section that talks about the Shaykh, and the big example that he's picking up on, really big example, is that the Shaykh is a physician, and he goes as far as to say, like Galen and Hippocrates, we have books called Tabaqat al-Atibba, books that are Tabaqat of the physicians that go all the way back to the Greeks, because Muslim physicians, by the way, our medical tradition, we see that we are a continuation of that. Or we take from that and then we add the Islamic stuff to it. Anyway, it's neither here nor there. That's a very good example, better than my example of the coach, of course, because like the physician of the physical body tries to find out what the symptoms are and gives you medicine so that you can get better and be the best version of your physical self, so does the Shaykh of Tasawwuf understand the ailments of the heart and therefore can give you the remedies that you need so that you can be the best version of yourself, of your nafs. It's really the same exact thing. And as the physician needs to be up to date, nuanced, understand, can listen to what's said and also what's not said, what's apparent and what's hidden, so does the Shaykh of Tasawwuf have to have the same thing and same skill set and same levels of detail when it comes to the spiritual aspect of the person. So this is somebody who has deep, deep insight. And, I didn't say this in the class, in the lectures, but I'll say it now. You have to be pretty worldly. Also, I think a lot of times people forget that, from the sense that you need to know the way the world works, because you need to know how people are living. Because when people come to you and they complain about a family situation or a work situation, and you have no idea, then your irshad, your instruction is not going to be that accurate. You got to be you have to know about it. I'm not saying you have to be worldly, that sounded bad, I guess. Not dunyawi, but you have to be, a person of al-haya. You know how people live and what they live, and you're living in the same world they are. etc. And then we just started talking about at the very end about the assembly, meaning that we are in a group of people, and one of the things that has to happen, the first thing that has to happen is instruction. The point of view of being in a group with the sheikh is the sheikh is there to teach you, and then you got to learn from the sheikh and benefit from the sheikh. And then the other benefit where we kind of just left off on, but I'll pick up in the next class, is that when you're with other people, you can see how the sheikh will say this, show you the examples of the murids that have advanced, so you look up to them. And those are the main things we talked about. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.